we searched for some investors, potential investors, and he knew a guy who was like half a billionaire in Korea. Basically, the K wave inclined rapidly since late 2010s. But
Hmm.
I heard from the news that India was pretty much the only country that Korean wave could not penetrate. When I
Hmm.
turned an adult, I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and so basically it's incurable.
So, Gonu, thank you for joining the podcast. One of the reasons that we had got connected, the primary reason, is because I had met Unso first week that I arrived in Seoul, and I was impressed at his age of being like 18, how ambitious he was. And I had wondered, are there other people like Unso, kind of in his network or in his orbit, that are also like big picture thinkers and working on interesting projects? And so when he introduced the two of us, I was very curious to kind of pick your brain and enjoyed our chat last time. So maybe some context for the people that are listening and watching. Could you provide a brief bit of background on who you are and what you're currently up to in the UK?
So my name is Geonwoo Park. I'm born and raised in Korea. I'm currently an Imperial College London computing undergrad student. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it.
And how did you and Unso originally get connected? Because I remember, I know that you guys haven't been friends for all that long. But what was the original way that you guys found each other?
Um, I think it was this May. I had to take some recent exams for my
Hmm.
college because I basically failed some of the modules. So I had to come back to the UK while I was like, you know, um, well, my original plan was just to come back to my home country and just chill out for the vacation, but I had to come
Hmm.
back to the UK earlier to take the exams. But then while I was preparing for the exams, I've just ran into this, I've just run into this bunch of writings with originality.
Hmm.
And it was obviously written by Eunseo. So I was like, this guy is interesting. It's especially interesting because he's really young. I think
Yeah.
he's 18 years old, right?
Hmm.
So a high school kid with this much openness and creativity and originality. Originality part was actually the most impressing thing.
Hmm.
So I cold mailed him through Twitter and asked if we could have a coffee chat, and that's how it started.
Very interesting. Yeah, I agree. The way that he thinks is quite different from a lot of other young Korean people that I meet. For you, one of the things that most caught my attention was on your Instagram. You have kind of a link to this Koreans in India page. With Cambridge, one of the things that I've been most interested in is how do I bridge people of all different backgrounds, Korean people in other parts of the world, and also people that are living in Korea that have different ethnicities, but care about like Korea's future. So it piqued my interest when I saw the Koreans in India Instagram page, and it had done quite well in a very short period of time. Could you provide a little bit of context on like why you decided to start that, and the whole India journey? I'm just very curious overall.
Oh yeah, sure. So I think early this year, it was early this year. Early this year, I kind of tried to think of a way to make some money. Um, and I heard about a Korean photo booth studio doing well in London Soho Street.
Hmm.
Basically, I heard they're making like millions of dollars per year with profit margin like 80-90%, which sounded like a huge money
Yeah.
that time. So I was like, I asked my friend, my best friend, we should do this. Why not? And we met. We searched for some investors, potential investors, and he knew a guy who was like half a billionaire in Korea. He's
Hmm.
Korean as well, and the relationship between that rich guy and my friend was he was my friend's father's best friend, so that
Got
we
it.
could trust him, and he had some kind of reason to give decent advice.
Mm.
And we met him, the potential investor guy, and we gave him basically a pitch, a context as well, and got some advice. The first advice, the conclusion was, he didn't like the fact that we came up with such a small business idea,
Hmm.
from his perspective at least. So he kind of emphasized, building a business is pretty difficult, regardless of the size,
Hmm.
and building like really big business uh, is not like, if let's say if you're trying to build 100 times bigger business than the other one, it's not 100 times harder. It's
Right.
equally difficult. So he emphasized the market size, scalability, and profitability. Okay, that was interesting. He gave some different advices as well. The second advice was, he said, you know, you need to think about a way to differentiate yourself from the other competitors as well.
Hmm.
And one of the things he mentioned was social media is one of the mediums that the younger generations are really better with than the
Yep.
older generation. So I took it personally, and after with those advices, um, after the meeting, I looked at the Goldman Sachs report of uh, 2050. Oh, actually, I have to mention this as well. He also mentioned, like, looking back at his 50 years of career, as a Korean guy, for his generation, he realized that in 30s, if you grind and you have the talent, you could become 10 million, like tens of millionaire. And
Hmm.
then in your 40s, if you're lucky enough, you get to make $100 million. And in your 50s, usually you hit the career high.
Hmm.
Uh, so I was like, okay, building a really big business takes time and it's really difficult. And usually you have the chance to build your biggest, career in a high business when you get 50.
Hmm.
Uh, so I looked at the Goldman Sachs report of 2050 GDP ranks, uh, and number one country was, I think it was it was China actually. Number two was the United States, and number three was India.
Hmm.
I thought India was very interesting. It was quite unexpected for me, so I booked a flight ticket the the very next day, and
Hmm.
then flew to India the next week to Mumbai. That's how it started. And because he also gave me the advice about the social media thing, I thought, I don't have any background. I don't have a name card, so why not use social media as a name card? And yeah, that's how it started.
And this all like happened. It was over a very brief short period of time, because if I remember correctly, of like even scrolling through the Koreans in India page, it's not like you'd been posting on there for years. This was like all within the last 12 to 18 months or so.
Yeah, yeah, it started this year. So
And had you done anything like this? Not necessarily like Koreans in India, but even like trying to build your own business, or launch something in the UK, or when you were like in high school in Korea, in terms of like entrepreneurial startup, all of that interest. Had you done anything similar personally that you used to frame the experience, or was this really the first time you had done something like this?
hmm, good question. I would say throughout my student years, I've been quite familiar with the leadership position. I've been always related to the student council thing.
Hmm.
So I was pretty comfortable uh, starting something off. And then I would say when my first job was about fashion influencer IT startup thing,
Hmm.
and I was quite familiar with those creators, and I myself kind of did some postings of fashion things to Instagram. So
Hmm.
Instagram was a very familiar platform for me as well. Wasn't an influencer though. Uh, and then last year when ChatGPT came out, no, 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 last 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 year's March, I think, when I first used ChatGPT personally, I got shocked and I tried to make some projects.
Hmm.
For instance, like um, one of the interesting ideas was basically to build OnlyFans for anime characters, because basically, generative AI allows you to literally generate any, you know, fictional characters really easily.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought now with the bots and the lowered bar for generating um, various personas online, I
Mm.
didn't really think, you know, the whether how you look like really matter, whether you're
Mm.
a real human or not. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought it would be an interesting project, but my girlfriend and my parents really didn't like it. That's
Yeah.
why I stopped it. I did kind of make money out of it a little bit, but it was an interesting project. Those kind of things, but really didn't, you know, um, never was a as big as the Koreans in India scale. I never flew out to different countries or met the users real time. Never happened.
What did your parents think of the starting the Koreans in India channel and you flying to India? Because I mean, you've been a university student for the past 4 years or so, and you're studying computer science, if I remember correctly. So this whole side project, did you inform your parents about like what you were doing and what you were up to?
Um, yeah, my parents were quite supportive with whatever I did, as long as I prevented myself from, you know, dropping out of college.
Mm,
So I would say they were quite supportive. Didn't really care because they knew from their experiences that I really don't listen to them.
I see. I see. That makes sense. You have a strong independence will. Um, So tell me a little bit because you had this idea, the photo booth idea initially, from seeing that in the UK, and then you decide to travel to India, start the Koreans in India Instagram page. Was there still this idea in the back of your head that you would try and build these photo booths throughout India, or was it simply I'm just going to use social media, or was it there is no real plan. I'm just going to kind of see what happens as I explore India and start uploading to social media. Can you tell me a little bit about that thought process?
Um, in a big picture, I really didn't have any background knowledge about India at all. So I would say there was no like this is the go-to kind of strategy because
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't have any information. Um, but at the same time, I'm pretty good with like uh, building a narrative. So
Hmm.
I thought, the story, the motive of going to India with this Korean photo booth idea was quite entertaining and would be a good starter for any conversations.
Hmm.
So that definitely was there while I was traveling India.
That makes sense. And in terms of the how many times you've been to India at this point, which cities you've hit, and also the overall experience, because me as like an American coming to Korea, for example, there have been some like cultural nuances that I've picked up on, but because of my own Korean heritage, it's like a lot of that stuff is familiar, whether it's the food, the smells, the cultural customs, all of that stuff. But
Mhm.
you being Korean born and raised, spending time in the UK, I would imagine that going to India for the first time is quite a eye opening experience.
Yeah, it definitely was an eye-opening experience. I would say, especially because I've never visited the mainland China.
Mm.
So I've heard from my friends India is quite similar to China back then in like 2007, 2005, with with the huge continent diversity and different languages and all that, and a lot of population as well, of course. It's quite chaotic, and at the same time, it's incredibly inspiring, to be honest, to see that within that chaos there is some kind of order uh, that 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 exists based on trust. I think that
Hmm.
trust is also based on religion as well. So that was very interesting. But to answer to your questions, I think I've been to India so far four or five times so
Hmm.
far. I've been to the metropolitan cities, Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore.
Hmm.
First time I went there for a week to Mumbai for kind of a, you know, uh, examine, exploring how India is like. The takeaway there was two things. There was middle class, and middle class had the consuming power that was quite interesting.
Hmm.
Second thing was there was actually a photo booth studio, Korean photo booth studio existing, which was the first ever photo booth studio in India.
Hmm.
Mm-mm. And it was founded by an Indian guy, so it wasn't like at that level of Korean original photo booth studios, but still, you it was interesting. Second time, I visited India. It was a planned visiting because the first time was like very impromptu kind of thing.
Hmm.
Uh, Second time, I visited there with my best friend for a month. Uh, to all three cities that I mentioned, Delhi, Bangalore, and Mumbai. And I've met a bunch of um, like domestic people. It was possible because when I went to India, Mumbai for the first time, uh, um, what I accomplished was basically back then my social media didn't have any followers, and
Hmm.
my algorithm, the account's algorithm, was not tuned in targeting Indian audience.
Hmm.
So I tried to tune the algorithm by just asking people to follow my account in the gates of India. Because if you go to Gate of India in Mumbai, there are a lot of tourists, Indian tourists that are from different uh, cities and you know states, and they like encountering foreigners is a very unique experience for them.
Hmm.
So whenever they foreigners, they try to take photos together because they don't know if this guy is a famous dude or not. So we pretended to be celebrities and we gave them like signatures, took photos, and in exchange we asked them to follow our Instagram, and I think it was quite a bright idea. We targeted 100 followers, and we made it, and the algorithm was set up to Indian audience. And then when I came back to Korea with the takeaways that there was a huge Korean hype going on in India,
Hmm.
I've asked one of my influencer friends, fashion influencer friends with a good look, to take to just make one Instagram reel about we're gonna visit India, and it blew up basically. That one video allowed me to gain like 10K followers within a week, basically.
Wow. Was that the first video that you had uploaded?
No, it wasn't the first one. It was
Okay.
a video with this handsome dude,
Gotcha.
basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
looks matter a lot on social
looks
media,
there a lot, of
obviously.
course. It's Instagram, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but then he did not make it to the trip though. So
Hmm.
I kind of substituted him to a different friend. But
Hmm.
anyways, with that over 10K followers, it really at that time worked as a name card because uh, a lot of Indians wanted to do business related to Korean things. They wanted to import some kind of thing. They wanted,
Hmm.
to buy whatever that is. But then they could not find someone to trust. But I'm a public figure on Instagram, and with all the open information about myself. So it was very helpful for me to meet various people, including like celebrities. I've met some royal families there. I've met actually a royal family dude. He owns like he's a billionaire basically. He's younger than me. I've heard like some interesting things about the old money kind of stuff there.
Hmm.
Uh, and domestic people, of course, they know their place, so they've introduced me about the cultural things. I've tried many different foods. I went to their homes, visited different homes, and saw what the rich people home is like. Some other poor people home is like.
Hmm.
I really had a good, nice tour guides ready for me with Instagram. It was really fun.
Did you have any like dicey or kind of scary, unusual experiences as well? I had been recording some of these podcasts in person in Seoul in the Global Startup Center in Gangnam, and the kind of managing director of Tipstown and the head of operations at the Global Startup Center. I was curious about like why that had all gotten started, and so I decided to interview him a little bit about his background and his affiliation with Tipstown. Um, and it ended up diverging into a whole story of how he ended up traveling to India and how he had gotten basically like deceived. He was like in the Himalayan mountains, and then like a lot of his money he lost as a result of like paying a quote unquote like tour guide way too much
Mm.
money for no real like expert advice. Did you have any unusual or scary experiences, or did you feel like you were able to figure out pretty quickly who the people were that you should trust and who the people were that you shouldn't?
I was extra careful, and I think um, because I had a clear purpose of, I didn't visit there to, learn the spiritualism or something like that, to
Sure.
some village places or touristy places. I went there to do business, so I went
Hmm.
there to the most advanced cities with relatively more safety. That's why I think I really didn't run into any of the dangerous people.
So tell me this, because it seems like what you have identified to some extent is like a imbalance between supply demand dynamic. There seems to be a lot of demand for, let's just say, like K culture types of stuff. Do these like big time, let's say K-pop entertainment companies, do they have presences in India where they do shows and things like that? Or like, why do you feel like this opportunity exists right now and is so large?
So my analysis is basically the K wave uh, inclined rapidly since late 2010s, and it kind of picked around like COVID and next right after COVID,
Mm-hmm.
especially with the BTS thing. And interesting thing about BTS, the rise of BTS was it was due to YouTube uh, of BTS thing.
Mm.
They had a YouTube channel of broadcasting the chemicals of them living together and working on their projects, and it kind of uh, worked. Uh, and with the COVID thing, people couldn't go outside, and obviously the contents were kind of worked.
Mm.
And it, I can say this because I felt it when I came to London in 2022. Because when I was in when I came to London in 2020 or 2019 for an interview for my college. And
Mm.
back then there was like nobody knew about Korea, and I couldn't hear any Korean songs or nothing like that. And nobody seemed to care about Korean guys, especially because Asian male is at the lowest the very lowest hierarchy of the world. And then
Yeah.
when I came back after the COVID thing
Mm-hmm.
as a second year, uh, I was a clubbing guy back then,
Mm.
and whenever I go clubbing or like partying, I was pretty popular just with the title "I'm a Korean dude"
Yeah.
that actually enjoys partying,
Mm.
and that was incredible. I'm not saying the experience is incredible. I'm saying the rapid rise of the Korean popularity was
Mm.
incredible. But
Mm-hmm.
I heard from the news that India was the pretty much the only country that Korean wave could not penetrate back then. My theory is India was not ready for this because India's economy was not that high enough for
Mm.
the people to kind of afford the non-necessity consuming
Mm-hmm.
things.
Yep.
But then they have like 7% annual, GDP growth these days.
Mm.
If, like today, now it's opening. I think I heard like the big uh, entertainment idols, for instance, EXO or these guys are coming to India like starting this winter, basically. I've heard
Oh.
on the 14th of December there would be the biggest ever K-pop uh, festival opening in Mumbai. I know the CEO of that agency,
Mm.
and she told me that this would be the biggest ever, and this would be like one of the official things happening. I think like second time or third time kind of thing. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, you had mentioned earlier
Mm,
identifying there's a growing middle class in India, and it makes sense, kind of what you're saying. It's like before, maybe their base needs needed to be satisfied, and there wasn't much disposable income. But as the economy grows and expands, a lot of people have disposable income to expend money on entertainment and all of that types of stuff. So, in terms of the trips that you had taken to India, and what I guess was it mostly learning experience for you of you were trying to gather information and figure out what business opportunities might be most interesting, and also I know you held like a handful of events or like social gatherings for people in India. Could you share a little bit more context about like what you did during your visits?
yeah, sure. So the investor guy that I met, basically who gave me the cost for all this Indian thing, he he worked as a mentor to me, basically.
Mm.
So the first advice was seek for a really big market. So I found India, and then I came back with the social media account with over 10K followers, and I
Mm.
asked him like, what should I do? I've made this, and the first impression he gave was, um, I think you're gonna you're gonna make some money, like meaning you're gonna be rich, because he
Yeah.
he's been doing consumer oriented business, like basic B2C businesses, selling things,
Mm.
wholesaling or like making brands, and from his perspective, business is all about gathering the people, and once you gather the people, that's 99% of the job's done. You just have to sell something that people want, and he's um, message is basically you know how to gather the people, so you've done 99% of the job.
Mm.
Now you have to do the remaining 1%, which means what he said was he made an interesting statement that he does not believe in the startup thing, um, because startup is all about taking huge risks,
Mm.
not knowing whether it would work out or not. And
Yep.
even if it works out, for instance, like Coupang, the CEO wouldn't be the large stakeholder shareholder.
Mm-hmm.
So the company isn't yours. You cannot do whatever you want.
Yep.
Um, and basically, it did not make sense to him, that the mentor guy. So he mentioned if you want to become a businessman, from the day one you have to make some money, and with that money you're making bigger monies. And if you have things that you want to do it when you can afford like doing 10 different businesses at the same time. You can fail five of them, then you can try five different businesses that you want. So yeah, the message was just make some money out of your audience. So I went back to India with the idea that before when I went there for the second trip, the 1 month trip, I visited Kotra. You know Kotra, right?
No, I don't.
Korean organization for trading something. So
Ah, okay.
they're in charge of trading with the country. And the Kotra person told us that there are only two items working in India right now: the food sector, especially ramen, and the cosmetic sector, skincare products
Mm.
especially.
Mm-hmm.
Skincare products, especially because we have different skin tones, and most of the Korean skincare brands, or cosmetic brands, they don't have the colors for darker people.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. So I was like, sure, skincare products might work. And I've asked my Instagram followers as well. They wanted skincare products. Most of them were like teenage female followers,
Mm.
basically. So of course, it made sense. So
Yep.
and at that time, Unso asked me to take him to India
Mm.
and show India around. So I was like, uh, I've got 1 week left until the trip, and why not try to do some, try to sell some skincare products.
Hmm.
But then the problem was I didn't have any budget, and nor did I had experience. So the idea was to do some, I would say politics, because
Yeah.
I knew the demand and supply thing, uh, and I was quite familiar with social media and influencers. Um, Basically, there were a few key players that played the roles. First thing was I went to the convention, I think. There was this skincare conference, 박람회, happening
Hmm.
in Samsung, the hall. There a bunch of emerging skincare cosmetics brands just advertising about their brands. I went there bluffing about my Instagram account, telling them I'm gonna host like the biggest ever, skincare influencer Korean beauty parties in India in
Hmm.
those three metropolitan cities. I'm the expert. I've got all the influencers listed here. I guarantee you like over several million views, advertisement effects, blah blah
Hmm.
blah. All I need is you need to send me uh, products, sample products, uh, until this date to my home. Then I'll get those products and do the events.
Hmm.
And the products I mentioned, it has to be eco-friendly because Indian people care about that, and it has to be cheap. Pricing around like $5 to maximum like $20. And I've got around, I think, let's see, like 5,000 bucks amount of sample products ready.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, from three different brands.
Hmm.
They've sent like serums, mostly serums and some lotions and mask packs, face masks. Um, and I've uploaded at the same time. I've uploaded a Instagram reel about I'm hosting this event in India. I need I know you Instagram influencers. You want some kind of content material if you're a Korean beauty enthusiast and you want to get free Korean skincare products that are not available in the market. Then I can
Hmm.
give it free to you. You just have to come to the event and do some marketing for me. I've got the list, and with the influencers, I've got the free venues as well because venues needed the marketing as well. I've got the
Hmm.
influencers; they're gonna do some advertisement automatically with Instagram. Um, and oh, and I also asked, the Korean skincare brands, if you have some spared money, I need some flight ticket price as well. Uh, one company gave me a couple $100, so it really helped as well. So I went to Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore and did the events. Basically, it was a very rushed thing, but pretty successful. If you go to my Instagram account, then there's this story highlights. You can see what kind of events there were. Yeah.
Even the way that you think and these different projects that you have gotten yourself into, it feels like you should have been some sort of like a business major or entrepreneurship kind of major. You decided to study computer science, right, at Imperial College of London. And I'm just curious when you first started, when you decided to go to university and were figuring out what it was you should study, how you decided to study computer science, and what your initial thoughts were, like career path of what you wanted to do. Because all this stuff in India was kind of unexpected, right, in like your back half of university years. So I'm curious what your initial ambitions or thought process was as it relates to studying at university and then your future career.
Hmm. Good question. I don't think I'm an engineer material uh, by nature,
Mm.
but technology has always been a very interesting thing to me because it seemed even though I don't understand it really well, it seemed so powerful. That was it.
Yep.
And back then, late 2010s, I entered my high school when I was like 20, it was 2017, and until it was 2019, I graduated, and the comsci thing with AI, and everything was so rapidly, you know, growing, and it seemed unreasonable, and there was definitely this comsci hype happening back then as well.
Hmm.
So I basically joined the hype, but then the reason was quite different. I was more interested in the philosophical side of the computer science than the technical side. So for my commentative essays for I think UK one we call personal statement. I wrote about my concerns and philosophical kind of pondering about the indications of AIs and it's how apprehensive I am with it,
Hmm.
uh, based on like movies like iRobot or like Ex Machina.
Hmm.
So I was more of that kind of person,
Hmm.
and turned out it was right. Technology was much more powerful than I thought. Um, I remember I once, I'm not sure if I'm right, but I remember I once interpreted Steve Jobs talking about artists. He mentioned the Apple people, they would have been artists when they were born in different centuries. They would have been like singers or poetries or different artists. But because they were born in during that time period, they were doing building Apple. Um, what Steve Jobs meant was they're more mission oriented and they have more lofty kind of um, perfectionistic point of view. That's I
Right.
think that's what he meant reading the Walter Isaacson's autobiography of Steve Jobs. But then
Hmm.
how I thought when I first heard about that was basically if you think about what art is the value of art is determined by the market, basically supply and demand,
Hmm.
and and artists try to make the most valuable art of all time. And in the 21st century, it's gotta be technology related thing
Hmm.
because there's it's so much scalable, destructive, so much demand. Uh, and I thought that's what he meant, but I'm not. I don't think he meant in that way. But
Hmm.
this kind of reflects how I think of technology. Technology's scalability and destructiveness. It's so powerful that I couldn't resist to get into this field.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I don't know if you've come across Alvin Toffler before, but he wrote a book in the 1970s called Future Shock. And it was kind of about the relationship between technology and society, and the fact that for the vast majority of human history, progress has looked very stagnant and linear. And as we enter the kind of digital age and the technological age of now, we are at exponential growth in terms of society's ability to digest technology and adapt to it, both the benefits and the downsides. There is a kind of a generational psychological reaction of just like utter shock and a lot of things in modern society will break down. So it was one of the most like interesting books that I had read in the past like year or two of like the 50 plus books that I had read, and kind of some of what you're saying in terms of your reflections on Steve Jobs and the Walter Isaacson autobiography reminded me a lot of that book. So it's definitely worth checking out. It's called Future Shock. Um, but I guess more broadly as well in terms of your plans, like now that you have this India exposure and you're coming up on graduating at university, are you still trying to figure out what it is exactly that you'll end up doing? And also with Cambridge, and as I scale this out, one of the things that I'm trying to do is figure out what areas of expertise and areas of interest people within the ecosystem have, and where there is going to be likely like win-win opportunities for people to connect with one another. So I guess on both of those fronts, can you share a little bit about how you're thinking about the future and who you're most kind of interested in connecting with as well?
Mm, so I'm quite bullish with creator economy. Thinking I came up with this creator economy is the next thing kind of realization through a chronological observation of how the tech, especially computing industry, has evolved so far. On
Hmm.
top of hardware, there was operating systems. On top of OS, there was web, and on top of web, there was mobile phones, mobile apps, and social media. And then it seemed quite obvious it would be creators that would be the platforms themselves. Um, and in that sense, basically meant you gotta own a media. And while the software economy was all about building a software with technology and then you gathering the people around the software,
Hmm.
now you have the media and then you make other different products, including software, around that IP. That's how
Hmm.
I view the creator economy right now. And um, one of the most successful companies in the world, actually, that has proven this creator economy's essence to be very powerful is EO Studio, I think.
Hmm.
I've came across with this realization thanks to Unseo's help.
Hmm.
And I wasn't at first very convinced that it would be the next YC kind of a scale, as he argued. But
Sure.
then, um, apart from that as well, from my personal perspective, if I am to really thrive in the future, I gotta figure out a way to get into the mainstream networks, the inner circles of Silicon Valley or the powers in the world.
Hmm.
Um, and as a foreigner, it seemed quite convincing that leveraging EO Studio, so basically doing EO India, uh,
Hmm.
and then monopolizing the startup economy in India, eventually networking with the Indian American entrepreneurs or the CEOs, like the CEO of Google as well.
Hmm.
And then with those cards entering America seemed, you know, to be a quite convincing and well-established path. That's what I'm thinking
Hmm.
about right now. And at
Hmm.
the same time, Unseoul would be, you know, keep working on EO as well. So we aim to help each other as much as we can. He he's much of a intellectual thinker than me, so he might have a bigger plan. But that's my plan basically.
Yeah, it is. It's very. I feel like I got very lucky in crossing paths with him, and then now crossing paths with you, because there is something about maybe the way that most other Korean people think in terms of there is a very strong kind of structure and set path that most Koreans go through, where they go through the education system and then they get like let's say a good job at one of the large corporations, and then each next step is kind of set for them, and having discussions with people that are like free thinkers, independent thinkers, and that have also been like influenced by a lot of like the U.S. startup scene. I don't come across it that often, so it was very refreshing, and it's funny the fact that Unsa as a 18-year-old and you as like a college senior are two of the examples that I've come across. Um, Even for me trying to find some of these like young ambitious people that are working on interesting projects, one of the difficulties is that because I don't really speak Korean, my ability to find and have like real dialogue with them is very difficult. But your English is like basically fluent level. When you decided to study in the UK and even like your upbringing, I'm just curious how you picked up English, and was that always part of your curriculum, or did you have experiences being abroad when you were younger?
I never studied abroad. I was in. Oh, I did. participate in a 1 month program in the U.S. while I was in middle school, just
Hmm.
attending a school in the U.S. Other than that, I never studied abroad. But I did start learning English quite early, before even entering elementary school, and then endless English, 학원s loop with along with actually the biggest impact for me was my high school. My high school was quite special. It's some of the it's in the form of 자사고 in Korean. It's basically a special purpose high school in Korea for students helping to prepare for to study abroad.
Hmm.
So all the modules were all the courses were done in English. Teachers were foreigners speaking English, and all my peers were basically more than half of them. Their mother tongue was English. The English was more comfortable.
Uh,
So that environment really helped me a lot to improve my English skills.
I see. That makes sense, and it's a big advantage now, just in terms of doing business, being in the UK. So when you were graduating from high school and figuring out colleges to go to, did you only apply to schools abroad, or were you potentially gonna study in Korea as well?
I only applied to foreign schools. I
Ah,
applied to NIU Abu Dhabi for my early decision actually, uh,
interesting.
primarily because so my GPA and all the portfolio was like kind of a good shot for Ivy League level, not
Mm,
the hips, but like Ivy League. But then I don't come from the money, so I needed the scholarships, but I didn't have like very outstanding portfolio or projects to get like scholarships from government or something like that. And we didn't want to take risk. That's why we heard NYU Abu Dhabi provides a lot of tuition scholarships. We
mm,
expected the full scholarship, but then they suddenly decreased a lot of scholarships. I've only got the half, and it didn't just felt like it's worth it.
mm.
So for safety, I've already applied to the UK schools without even skimming through what kind of schools they are. I just looked at the ranking and applied to the top five universities. I've missed the
Mm.
Oxford. I didn't get into Oxford, but then Imperial seemed to be a good school. And back then, I think my ex-girlfriend was also aiming for the UK schools. That's why I decided to go to the UK.
I see. When I talk to people here in Korea, one of the things that's interesting is that basically up until grade 12, like your senior year in high school, they're just like grinding away in terms of education, and that's like the entirety of their life. But then when they get to university, that's actually a time where they can kind of like relax, and the it's a little bit more laid back than, well, it's considerably more laid back, at least from what I hear. Going to school in the UK, the overall experience in terms of what your expectations were going in, um, both pros and cons. Like, tell me a little bit, because I don't know as much about the UK kind of educational ecosystem. And if you were to compare and contrast between the UK and Korea, I'm curious how you would characterize it.
It might be a bit off topic, but I have to mention that I had a little bit different path from the other peers because I got really sick when I graduated from my high school. When I
Hmm.
turned basically an adult, I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease. It's an autoimmune disease with inflammation, chronic inflammation all over your digestive systems. And because it's autoimmune disease, it's you don't know the root cause of it, and so basically it's incurable.
Hmm.
And the treatment is basically to get rid of your immune system, just suppress it as much as possible,
Hmm.
and that's basically meaning you just treating the symptoms, expecting some you know very bad side effects. For instance, like I have really higher possibility relatively than other people to get cancers because I have very low immune system.
Hmm.
So I've been ill, hospitalized, like severely ill. I couldn't
Mm.
even walk. I was on a wheelchair. I've been hospitalized for around a year, and that was the COVID season, so it was even worse because none of my friends or families could even visit me because it
Wow.
was hospital. I had to take the mask on every day. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Couldn't take a shower. Nothing.
Mm.
It was a very painful experience, that kind of experience taught me the attitude for me. It gave me so the interesting thing about incurable disease was if you get hurt, you usually get better, but because it's incurable, it was for the first time in my life that me encountering, um, this thing's not getting better, and I've never experienced this before.
Mm.
It was a very awkward, awkward and scary adventure for me, and that gave me the mental breakdown around after a year. The reason why the doctor could not give me the last treatment, the last injection that was available, was because if that does not work, then I've got no other choices.
Mm.
And with my young age, it was so uh, pathetic, I would say. So doctor was also very careful with using the last shot. So he promised me he's gonna use it after one period time, and until then, nothing worked. Like steroids, like suppressing my immune system with some pills, nothing worked. Um, I had a mental breakdown. All my ego kind of went down. I kind of I kind of accepted that this would be my destiny. That I've always been an elite kind of student throughout my whole life.
Hmm.
Then, with my English skills, I would just teach some elementary or middle school students, uh, gaining like $2,000 per month.
Hmm.
It's a good. I'm okay with it. That's how my thought process worked to kind of
Mm.
rationalize the entire system. Um, but then, thankfully, you know, um, the last treatment injection worked, so I got much better. And the entire like 1 year experience taught me resilience, basically, and the attitude of I've got nothing to lose. Um, and that allowed me to think and act out of the box, and that also gave my parents gave me more kind of a leeway uh, and lenience from my parents as well, because my
Mm.
parents thought my parents wanted me to live my life basically.
Hmm. If if that last shot didn't work, would that have meant that you would have likely died, or would that have meant you would have been bedridden for the rest of your life? What would that have meant if that last injection didn't work?
The latter, actually,
Mm.
until the next possible treatment comes out, you just your symptoms just does not get better, meaning just gets worse. Then you kind
Hmm.
of have to get rid of a decent chunk of your digestive systems, resulting in uh, making like artificial anus outside your belly, or
Wow.
you basically becoming disabled. In Korea so far, I am not considered a disabled person,
Hmm.
but if you get to that level, you become considered a disabled person. And there, uh, thankfully, the really thankful thing for me is recently the treatment has made rapid improvements, like in a very recent time. If I
Really?
were sick like 10 years ago, then I was probably like 99% sure I would have. The injection itself was super expensive 10 years ago. I couldn't afford it. But now with all those good insurance systems and much more availability with the new treatments.
So I don't know that much about Crohn's disease and how it works, but how is it the case that so didn't have Crohn's disease until you hit, let's say, age 20, and then you somehow contracted it? Or was it something you always had in, I guess, like your underlying genetics, and then there was some trigger that like awakened it? How does that work?
For some cases, I've heard the genetics might cause the Crohn's disease,
Hmm.
but then I turned out not to have the genes, so it's not my case so far. And I don't know. I've never had. I was pretty healthy. I was considering to become a professional like athlete until when I was like middle school. I was pretty serious with baseball, but then I gave up because my height, expected height, my parents are pretty short, and I was pretty good with studying, and so I was just being more rational, I would say. My passion was more towards the athletes, but I had to become more rational. But then, yeah, I was pretty healthy throughout my entire school days, and
Hmm.
suddenly I got sick.
There's a quote by this guy Naval Ravikant, who's a big angel investor in the states, and he says something like, "A healthy man wants 1,000 things, but a sick man only wants one thing." Right? And the ability for going through something where there's a deep, like maybe near death experience or some type of injury or sickness that could end your life is like a really powerful forcing mechanism that you can't really replicate with telling stories, or you can't really replicate by getting lectured by somebody. You have to like experience it. When you had mentioned before that like in a previous life you had enjoyed like going out and clubbing and partying and stuff like that, but not so much anymore. Was the Crohn's disease that experience, was that the before and after?
No, no, no. So the timeline is I got sick when I became an adult, while when I got the legal permission to party. See? So I
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
couldn't do those things while my friends were doing those things.
Mm.
I had the smartphone. We were living in the 21st century,
Hmm.
so I could see all my friends doing enjoying the fun time. By the way, that's how I also got familiar with uh, creator economy as well. I was
Hmm.
never a Instagram or social media kind of boy. But because I got sick, my self-esteem got really low. I started to care about my appearances, just because all I could do was just scrolling down Instagram while I was being hospitalized, laying down on a
Hmm.
bed. And and, and when I got better, I started working at this fashion IT company, interning there. But then my mentality was not like I'm gonna make a great company. It was more like, oh, I'm free. I'm living a life. I'm outside the hospital, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday until Sunday, pretty much every day, I went clubbing and then came back to work. Clubbing, then came back to work.
Oh, that's amazing.
Itaewon was my go-to place, and then I already did my first year while I was sick, somehow.
Hmm.
Uh, and then because throughout my first year, it was on all online because of the COVID season. For my second year, I went to the UK for the first time for my academics. I went to the UK, uh, uh, maintained the same lifestyle, partying and all that, um, until the first semester actually. So
Hmm.
after like 5 months of partying in Korea with extra 3 4 months in the UK, around 1 year partying,
Hmm.
no, that was enough for me. It really was never me. It never was Konu thing. And then I've came back to myself. And around that time, ChatGPT, I've used ChatGPT for the first time, and that gave me a shock. So my like survival instinct kind of triggered. Um, so I came back to this survival mode to kind of explore and grow, basically.
And the Crohn's disease situation. So does that for you, is that like cured at this point? Like it will never resurface and it's like the it's done, or is it something that you have to still manage? It just kind of lurks on a very low level for you. What's the what dynamic there?
Um, it's lingering. It's incurable so far. I hope somebody just I'm actually interested in biology because of this as well. While I was
Mm,
being hospitalized, I read tons of papers. I've reached out to some medics professors. I've reached out to my med students, friends, asking about the autoimmune disease and all that. I think it's reachable within my lifetime. Seriously,
hmm.
somebody's gonna cure it. But so far, it's incurable. What I have to do is getting the injection every 2 months. The injection takes around 2 to 3 hours uh, per time, and then it's pretty expensive. In the U.S., I've heard it's around $1,000 per time.
Hmm.
So every 2 months, over $1,000 is well,
Wow.
actually it's not $1,000. It's around $5,000. Sorry.
Jeez.
Yes, yeah, it's super expensive. But Korea, it's around like $100. So Korea is like because Korea for these kind of incurable diseases, including some severe diseases like cancers, they provide like 90%, 90%, 95% insurances from the government. So with the 90% insurance price, it's around $100. So this is a very lingering problem for me, especially as a person who wants to be more, global or universal.
So if that last injection didn't work, then more than likely you would still be in kind of a bedridden state, or you wouldn't have full control and autonomy over how you conduct your life. Yeah.
I've tried a lot of things. I was once a vegetarian. I was once, I was once a what do you call it, carnivore. Um, I did the meditation things. I've done pretty much everything that I could try,
Wow.
but nothing worked.
Hmm. Hmm. Incredible. Well, this is. I'm glad we got that piece of your backstory in because obviously it's very meaningful to you, and I imagine it has shaped you in many ways. We're coming up on time, but one, I appreciate you being willing to share. It's been really exciting for me to meet you and Unsa, and hopefully many more like ambitious young people as well. Because even for myself, like I have a lot of friends who, when I was in undergrad, were very curious and very ambitious, but then they kind of took a more structured and predictable path, I'd say. And it is rare for me to find people who not only have big ideas, but then have actions behind them where like they're actually trying stuff. And the stuff that you're doing in India is quite fascinating. The stuff like Unsa is moving to the U.S. and he's trying a bunch of stuff within the EO studio ecosystem. And so I'm very excited for the both of you and to be following along with your journeys. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me.